Welcome to Peace of Mind for Pet Parents, the podcast by BrightHaven Caregiver Academy. I'm Gail Pope.
And I'm Karen Wylie. And together we're here to support you in navigating life with your aging or ill pets. We know how deeply you care for your beloved companions, and we're here to offer guidance, understanding, and resources for this meaningful journey.
Each episode, we'll explore topics that address the daily challenges, emotional realities, and choices you face as a pet parent, helping you and your pets find peace, comfort, and joy. Whether it's making sense of a new diagnosis, adjusting to changing needs, or simply seeking a place to feel understood, you're not alone. Thank you for being here with us.
Hello, and welcome to Peace of Mind for Pet Parents. I'm Karen Wylie, here with my co-host and wonderful friend, Gail Pope, founder of BrightHaven. Today, we're going to talk about something that many pet parents avoid thinking about until they're right in the middle of grief, and that's planning for aftercare options before your pet dies. Now, before we go any further, let's define what we mean by aftercare, because it's probably not a term that you've heard much, if at all, unless you work in veterinary medicine or the funeral industry. Those terms are used very frequently there. Aftercare simply means what happens after your pet dies. Both Gail and I tend to think of this holistically. If you've been listening to our podcast for a while, we've talked a lot about a 3-day honoring process that we view as a sacred period after a pet has died, when we still believe the animal soul is still transitioning, still connected to the body in some way. That concept comes from the Buddhist traditions as well as Native American traditions. In Buddhism, the teaching is called the Bardo, B-A-R-D-O. That describes how the soul leaves the body slowly over time, and we can support that process in various ways. I will make sure we link to other resources in the show notes, because we have talked about what to do when a pet dies at home. We have a podcast episode on that as well as a blog post. And as I just mentioned, we have the 3-day honoring process, which you can think of like a wake, as we often do for humans. So we'll make sure those resources are linked below in the show notes. Today, we want to talk about what comes next when your pet has died. After you've had that sacred time with your pet's body, after you've completed whatever honoring process feels good to you, what decisions do you need to make about your pet's physical remains? And how can you plan for those decisions ahead of time so you're not left to figure it all out in crisis when the moment comes? So aftercare includes questions like, do I choose cremation, burial, or another option? What providers are available to me in my local area? Which one do I want to use? What do I need to know about costs? How do I involve my family in talking about these decisions and making these decisions? We're not going to cover memorialization and keepsakes today. That'll be another conversation in the future. So today we're going to focus on the planning piece. Now, Gail, you've supported hundreds of animals at the sanctuary, and you've supported many families who you've consulted with about this process. What do you see happen when families have thought about these aftercare decisions versus when they have not?
That's an interesting question. And it doesn't come up very often. Most of the consultation I do a one-time thing, and so I don't have an ongoing relationship that takes me to that point. Other times people will actually consult because they want to find out more about the 3-day process, perhaps, and what in the heck is it and why do you do it? So yes, it would come into those kind of conversations. And I would say it's hard to know, but maybe half and half, maybe 50% have already thought about after the death and what they would plan to do with the body. Actually, I think it may be more than 50%. I think most people already know whether they want to bury or cremate. Those kind of seem to be the two main things. And then there are those that are very focused on green burial or
Yes.
planting a tree and all of those kinds of things. It's not something that is given a huge amount of attention, I think, yet. I think this is a good thing to talk about because it's hard. If you think about let's step into the human world. I always like to do that with every
Yeah.
aspect of end of life. Many people don't plan for what's going to happen after they die, or they rely on mum or dad to already have made those plans. So I think it stretches to all corners of our lives, because when you have an animal that is approaching end of life, has had a terminal diagnosis, whatever, we do tend to live in that box of that part. We don't open the door and start thinking about the whole journey. So I guess that's what we're talking about today, is to actually have that in place. So it can be, I wouldn't call it seamless. Dying and death and grief is not a seamless thing. Once you've already considered your options and maybe done a little research and you've actually chosen a place or a company, whatever there are choices, so many choices these days. But yes, I think for some people, perhaps sitting down and actually planning, notebook, paper, pen, Google, and they do it as something that has to be done. I think others, perhaps more like me, and perhaps people who've had more animals that have passed on in the past, tend to think about it in daily life. As thoughts cross through your mind, it's like, yes, I think I would do that. Definitely, I really should think about contacting that company and finding out their charges. So it can be baby steps too. What do you think?
I agree with you that those of us who've had more pets over the years, we've had to make these decisions more frequently. So we've probably become aware of our options a little bit more. Certainly for the animals that we have had in hospice care in our homes, we have all that time with those pets, and we are aware that they're not going to be with us forever. We want them to be, but depending on what their diagnosis is and their rate of declining, so forth, I think we begin to think about the possibilities. But so often they're looking at planning as a bad luck process. That
Yeah.
somehow, if you are thinking about it, cremation or burial or acclimation, or so many different options these days, that you're being pessimistic, you're giving up hope. Somehow you're being morbid by thinking of it. And yet, if you don't think of it ahead of time, you're going to have to think about it when your pet dies, and then you're going to be grieving. You're going in between sobbing and crying. You're going to be hitting Google up to try to locate what your local options are. Just like we encourage pet parents with pets in hospice care to research your ERs ahead of time, whether you need an emergency room right now or not. Find out where they are, get their contact information, know how far away from your home they are, so that when or if you do need them, you've already done that research and you're prepared and you can take action. So I think that's the same kind of approach I try to have people take, because planning is not a four-letter word, and planning doesn't make something happen. It doesn't cause anything bad to happen for you or your pet. But planning ahead does give you more options, especially if you do want to honor your pet's body at home for any period of time. It allows you to plan ahead and have any supplies that you need. There's actually a lot of research that needs to be done these days. Now, apparently, cremation is chosen for about 90% of the patients that are euthanized at a vet clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is that the clinic typically has a relationship with a local crematorium and can then also provide this aftercare function for
Yeah.
you and your pet. But if your pet dies at home, you may still want to have the services of a crematorium, but you might also want to bury your pet, whether that's something that you can do at home or perhaps in a pet cemetery, which those are happening more and more frequently in so many areas. So how do you think, Gail, planning ahead for aftercare supports the honoring process rather than interfering with it?
You actually just took the words out of my mouth and turned them around to be a question. Because as you were talking, that's what was coming to me. Working through knowing what you plan to do afterwards is part of honoring. It's honoring the being that you love. Again, whether it's yourself or your animal, it really is honoring what their wishes would be. Obviously, with our animals, they don't generally have the ability to tell us what they would like to happen to their body. So I think most of us will revert to what we plan for ourselves. So, in some ways, as we start thinking, it's good for us to think about ourselves as part of that equation too. But yes, it really is. To me, it ties up very closely to anticipatory grief, because when you first have that thought that flies into your mind, oh gosh, I wonder when he's going to die. Once that happens, then everything starts to change in your life, and these little thoughts do filter in and out of your brain. So having those at this stage, when you are anticipating the future, while it's part and parcel of the love and the loving celebration, all the things that you plan and that you honor in that being, to me, it's part of a package. It doesn't have to be done here and now, but it's just something to think about. Stream coming through your brain. What am I going to do? The 3-day process. Does that feel right to me? No, that doesn't fit. Should I? Oh, there's a pet cemetery in town. I wonder if I should drive by there one day and just see what it's like. So it allows you to just take baby steps towards the decision.
Yes, because every time you think of a possibility, you often find yourself rejecting it as, no, that doesn't feel right, just like you said, or, maybe. It's not where you have to dwell on it, but at least beginning to acknowledge the different options gives you a bit of a start. In one of our recent podcasts, I shared an example of someone we both know whose pet had cancer and was being treated extensively for 6 months. Even the day before the pet needed to be euthanized because of a crisis, they had been told that the pet had beaten the cancer and everything was fine. Then overnight, the pet crashed and they euthanized the next day. That was the couple who were told about a wonderful communal cremation process that really did sound lovely. In their grief, they had a euthanasia at home, and so they were relinquishing the body to the veterinarian to take. So the vet was saying, this is what we could do. And they said, okay, yeah, sure, that sounds fine. They didn't find out till many days later that they weren't going to get the ashes back.
That's right. That's a big one.
That's a big one because there's a very big difference between what is a communal cremation, which means other pets are cremated at the same time yours is, and you will not be getting the ashes back. If you want the ashes back, it needs to be a private cremation. So if you don't know about that, and especially when you're seeing the cost difference, because the communal
Oh, yes.
cremation is much less expensive than the private cremation. Sometimes, if it hasn't been researched and thought about ahead of time, people can make a decision that really is wrong for them because later on they're going to regret it. That is going to affect their ability to recover from the grief because they're always going to be revisiting and feeling like they didn't do right by their pet, that they don't have ashes back, that they could put in so many different forms of memorialization, from a stained glass office weight for your desk, or jewelry is another place where they're able to put your animal's ashes. All these various ways to keep your pet with you in whatever way you would like to. But if you are not thinking ahead to what happens to your pet's physical remains after they no longer need that body, you will be ending up with decisions you made that may not really fit you or your family.
Yes, that's a very good point. Very good point.
For anyone who might be feeling like it's a superstitious fear, they don't want to consider any of it. If I plan for it, am I somehow making it happen? Or am I making it happen sooner? What would you say to those folks, Gail? Because I know for a lot of people, especially when we've just learned about a pet having a difficult or terminal diagnosis, we really don't want to even think about them being gone. So we're going to be putting these aftercare ideas off to the side. We don't want to consider them at all.
Oof. I think my first answer here has to be I don't know. The reason that I'm saying that is because a huge number of people don't want to face the word death itself. They don't want to think about their deaths. They don't want to think about their family, whether they have 2 or 4 feet. They don't want to think about death. So the kind of planning we're talking about here is way down the line because they don't want to think about the actual time before death and how they can approach that. Obviously, for me, I would weave it all very gradually in together into a continuum of caring for, loving, making plans for. It's all important. It's all important done before death rather than in a panic after death. So if you're the kind of person that is open to talking about the future with your vet, with another practitioner, with anybody, a friend, family, then I think it's something that can be woven into the conversation. Again, coming under the subject of death and dying, we have the fact that they're not commonplace things for us all to talk about. That's what I guess we're trying to change. We want to talk about living while in every single stage of life, living while dying. If you have a terminal diagnosis for your animal and you're concentrating on the end of their life, you're not enjoying the moment. You're not enjoying life with them. So that's part of the hurdle to bring you to the mindset to plan for the future. Once you do, it makes a huge difference.
I think it does too. That's where we started out earlier saying that each of us have had a lot of animals through the years. And so this is something we've thought about. I have a lovely front garden where most of my pets have been buried. So I always know what I'm going to be doing. It's not where it changes with each and every pet. I've got a plan.
Yes.
I know where they're going to be. And I've chosen that because it's right off of our front deck, our front porch. So, especially during the 6 or 8 months where the weather is just lovely here in the Blue Ridge, I feel them closer to me. So, the choice I make of how to handle their body, their physical remains, is very much tied to my memories of them and my processing of grief and the sadness too, because they're right there with me. So that's a choice I've made. Now, of course, I do live in a very rural part of Appalachia in the mountains where there are no restrictions about burying your pet. That's not true for a whole lot of places in the United States and other countries as well. If someone wants to bury their pet, that is something they need to check the local ordinances and regulations for.
Yes, definitely.
Especially in urban areas, in townhome communities, neighborhoods. You have to be very watchful of where your water sources are.
Exactly. Yes.
To make sure that your animal is not being placed where water could be contaminated over time. You can choose to have your pet euthanized. We always talk so much about natural transition and working toward that as a goal, but we recognize that there are times that euthanasia is the best option for a family or a particular pet. Just because the pet is euthanized at the clinic or euthanized at home doesn't mean that the pet then has to be cremated. The pet can also be buried, but
Yes.
it's important to remember that the euthanasia solution that allows your pet to leave this world is something you want to prevent other animals from having access to. I remember reading about a case a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, where there'd been some flooding in an area. I think it was in West Virginia, and a couple horses that had been euthanized several years prior, their bodies, what was left of their bodies, became visible. And the dogs then had access to the remains of the horses. The horses had been euthanized. So the dogs were then ingesting the euthanasia solutions, and the dogs were dying. So that's something for home burial. There are now vinyl bags in different sizes that your pet can be put into. You're also supposed to bury them 3 feet. At least 3 feet is generally recommended in most of the local ordinances that I've seen. Having your pet's body enclosed in something that no other animal can access is a way of taking care of the other animal, the wildlife in the area, and other pets. It's not something to think about when you start talking about this. My immediate thought was, oh boy, people aren't going to like me talking about this. But it's important so that it is something for you to think about in terms of protecting wildlife, protecting other animals in the neighborhood, protecting your own animals. So that is something to mention, that if your pet has been euthanized, you can still bury them, but there are additional precautions you need to take.
Yes, I think your mention of the 3 foot depth is really important, regardless of euthanasia. Anyway, I remember one instance that I heard about where a dog died very naturally at home. They buried him in the back garden, and a few days later, another dog dug him up. And that was heartbreaking. That was really an awful experience for these people. They hadn't gone deep enough. So that 3 foot is very valid and very important to do.
Not just for the preventing an emotional crisis of having your pet's remains dug up, but also for all the other reasons we've been talking about in terms of safety for other pets and water supply and so forth. So there are things to think about that most of us don't think about.
I think the consideration for a pet cemetery is very valid. It's more of you don't hear of those, or you didn't used to hear of them hardly at all, but now they are becoming much more common. We have one not far from where I live, and I guess it's like any cemetery. It's a lovely, beautiful place. It's a perfect place to go and just sit and be. There are cemeteries, human ones, where they will bury pets as well. So that's something that is very nice. If you're thinking of actually burial, it's the way you want to go.
And there's some human cemeteries that are now allowing your pet's remains to be buried with you, which
Yes.
not in all states and not all cemeteries and so forth, but as more locales and states acknowledge the incredible bonds we have with our pets, that does seem to be something that is being allowed in a lot of different areas. So, Gail, let's think about what would help people tap into their own values to decide what's right for them in this. Because when we were starting, we were saying that when people start just even thinking about cremation, it's either, yeah, I could do that, or, oh, no, I can't. Or same with burial. Oh, I can't do that. I don't even want to think about it. Or I can't do it. I rent an apartment. Where would I ever be able to do it? So thinking ahead does allow you to begin sorting out what's possible for you. But then there's still additional decisions to be made that are part of your value system and what's important to you and your family.
Yes, I think once you look at the main options, maybe for most of us, it's an instant choice. This is what I would want. This is what I want for my dog or my cat. So it really is getting down to looking at the details. I think once you know what you want to do, then the details become far less of a problem because you're not focusing on should I do this? Should I do, oh my God, what about? And I heard about this and that and the other. Once you have a focus on one thing, then the details of how would I accomplish that? Who would I call? Will Google help me? And the answer to that is probably yes. There's very little these days that Google won't send you in the right direction. It's a difficult subject, and those of us who have had lots of pets, it becomes a routine. It becomes something that you don't question. But for others, it really is something to learn about. Again, at the bottom of everything we talk about is education. The more we understand about what's coming up in the future, the more we can be prepared for it rather than panic at the last minute. Oh my goodness, who do I call? What shall I do? And that's never good for anybody.
It never is. There's a big difference between Googling pet crematorium near me and doing that ahead of time compared to doing it when your pet has died and you're in a crisis and you're trying to figure out what your options are. Because what do you do if it's a weekend? Not all
Yeah.
crematoriums are ready to accept your pet's remains on a weekend. So knowing what hours different crematoriums are working are the kinds of things that would make your life easier when you need that information.
And then there's another little thing that I just thought about too. As you said earlier, I was going to say most, but I would imagine all veterinary hospitals have a relationship with a local crematorium and they become the middleman. However, there are a lot of people that I've come across in my work that actually prefer to deal with the crematorium directly. They take their animal maybe home from the vet or they're already home when they die, and they make an appointment and they go to the crematorium with their pet, and they wouldn't do it any other way. A lot of crematoriums are honoring little celebrations at their offices, which can be very lovely too. So, yeah, there are
Yes.
lots of options once you know your main way.
Interesting that you said about the drive because years ago, before I knew we were going to be staying in this physical area, I was cremating our pets. I began to look at the drive to the crematorium that my husband and I were making as kind of the same kind of ritual that is like driving to a cemetery after a
Mhm.
funeral for a human. Then you're driving to bring the body to the cemetery. Had that same feeling of being a sacred ritual and that we were bringing the body. That very much fit for us. For others, that's not something they want to do. Certainly, a veterinary clinic can be the middleman, so to speak, and accept your pet's remains and make arrangements. There's also a whole lot of crematoriums that will come and pick up your pet's body from your
Yeah.
home. So that's something to consider. Once again, you're not going to know what your options are or what the costs involved are unless you're researching ahead of time. This will also be something you want to talk to other members of your family about, because just when you figured out what you want to do doesn't necessarily mean that your spouse feels exactly the same way, or the children, and so forth. There is, though, tremendous emotional relief by being prepared ahead of time. So I do want to mention that we will be creating a booklet to address these kinds of planning issues for you. So do look for that in the coming weeks. And when we have it available, we'll come back to this podcast episode and put the link right there. You can always come to brightpathforpets.com and look in our resources area and our shop, and the booklet will be available for you there. As we bring this conversation to a close, Ms. Pope, what would you like to say? Any final words for someone listening and feeling that pull to, yeah, I probably do need to prepare, but they don't know where to start?
It's hard to sum it all up, but again, I try not to keep saying the same things over and over again. But to me, it's all about love. Love and honoring is what we're all striving to do for our loved ones at the end of life or at any stage of life. It's all part of this great transition that we're all living in. I think that's it. It's baby steps. You don't have to make decisions today. You don't have to do a booking. It's just start gathering information and allow it to settle. And then once you have a plan, you can make a phone call, you can jot down what it will cost, you can start to look at all the other things that you're going to be looking at too at this time of life. That doesn't focus on necessarily after the death, because you're still living. So let's focus on the living right now. Add in these little pieces.
Right. The baby steps, just thinking about one thing at a time, just answering one question at a time for yourself. So the gathering of information doesn't have to be a whole afternoon or an evening. It can be whenever you're ready, as much as you're ready, because as you're saying, Gail, it's really all about love.
It is. It's all about love.
All right. Well, as always, we thank you for being with us for this episode of Peace of Mind for Pet Parents. If you'd like any support in making these decisions or gathering information, do reach out to us at BrightHaven Caregiver Academy at brightpathforpets.com. We're always happy to be of support to you. Until the next time, take good care of yourself and your beloved companions, and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye now.
Goodbye now. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Peace of Mind for Pet Parents. We hope today's episode has offered you support and insight as you care for your aging or ill pets.
Remember, it's not just about the end, it's about living well at every stage of life. To continue your journey with us, explore more resources at BrightHaven Caregiver Academy's website, brightpathforpets.com, where you'll find guides, assessments, and a caring community of pet parents like you.
Until next time, may you and your pets find comfort, connection, and peace in every moment. Take care.